it was an unusual thing to do in those days. Yeah, there was probably less than. I've tried to add up how many wineries there actually were in 1971 in Napa County, and I don't think it was more than about 24, 25, right? So, I mean, yeah, but look, it was sort of the real goofy thing here is actually my brother. He's the one who's responsible for this whole thing. We were beach kids from Santa Monica, and we were both at UC Berkeley in the 60s. And it's kind of a joke that I tell people who come to visit, but there's a certain level of truth to it, which is that, you could acquire some peculiar ideas at Berkeley in the 60s, as I'm sure you're aware. And so we both got really interested in wine. I honestly don't remember quite how we got interested in wine, but we did more or less simultaneously. And he graduated in economics, and then managed to wangle his way into graduate school, for God's sake, at UC Davis in enology and viticulture. It's like, what? That's a little goofy. No, people didn't do that. We didn't grow up we weren't farmers. We were beach kids. Stuart was a lifeguard, for God's sake, in Santa Monica, in the summertime. A very good job, incidentally, for a college student. And our dad was a Republican stalwart, insurance guy, and it's like all of a sudden, Stuart decides to, become a farmer, and then. A partnership gets formed, and all of a sudden, I'm thinking to myself, man, if I don't, get on this train, the train's going to leave the station without me, and I'm going to really regret it. So one way and another, there we are, it's all his fault. It's all his fault for going to, 50 plus years later, here we are being interviewed, We're really, really lucky with timing. Really lucky with timing. If this had been something, for example, if we'd been 10 years younger, I don't think we could have pulled it off. People hadn't really discovered that Napa Valley was just on the verge of being discovered in those days, and I mean, in 71, as I say, I don't think there was more than 25 wineries in the whole county, but by 80, there was probably double that, if not more, right? And by the time you hit the 80s, there's 10, 12, 15 new wineries starting up almost every year, and property values are skyrocketing. We do indeed. Well, it doesn't matter how many times we beat them in international competitions, there's still ground zero in the wine world. Right. And it's partly because, look, take a look at Chateau Lafite Rothschild, okay? There's this absolutely scrumptious several hundred-year-old chateau on the label, okay? And let's give them credit. The French know how to make wine. They do that. They really do, right. Just because we've had some really big scores against them in international competition over the years doesn't mean that they don't know what they're doing, because they do. When Stuart and I were first getting interested in wine in the 60s, you automatically gravitated toward France. If you were interested, you didn't gravitate toward the Napa Valley. The Napa Valley was a backwater. Right. It was Napa, Sonoma, Mendocino, and you had to be basically a wine goof to even, a really dedicated wine goof to even know anything about us back in those days. So people in the 60s naturally gravitated toward France, and if you were really, really interested in wine, you got interested in Italian wine, maybe, and Spanish wine, and German wine, and so on. But France was definitely the focus, which is what we did. In spite of the fact that we're making wine that's as good as as almost anything that they're doing. It's hard to resent being compared to, being compared to France, because they really are sort of the world's leading wine country. We're very proud of the Estate Cabernet. We do think we'd like to give value for the dollar. Absolutely right. In some ways, our pricing bounces off what our neighbors are doing. I mean, it's like when the neighbors' prices get higher and higher, we think, geez, we better raise the price or nobody's going to respect us anymore. No, I mean, really.
I get it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
well, there's perception, right?
Honestly, if you're not charging a certain amount for your wine, you don't get any respect. So, we just try and keep it under control, But, honestly, it's a lot easier to sell a wine if it's a good value. And, I mean, this really has something to do with it. It's easier to sell wine, and neither of us really got into the wine business, believe it or not, to sell wine. We got into the wine business to grow grapes and to make wine. and neither of us wants to spend an important part of our time on the road selling wine. And unfortunately, you have to do some of that, and it's a lot easier if you're giving good value. The perennial hillside versus valley. Okay, there are certain cliches that it's easy to hillside structure, softer valley wines, that sort of thing. It's interesting to note that a British wine magazine that we subscribe to, Fine Wine, a few years back addressed this question directly, and they tasted a bunch of wines that were, half of which were made in the hills and half of which were made on the valley floor. And they couldn't make the distinction. We all think there's kind of a distinction,
sure.
Right? And I confess, in spite of their tasting, I kind of think so too. I mean, our 21, which is not released, is just absolutely typical, to me, typical hillside wine, very highly structured, big depth of flavor, certain level of tannin, kind of racy acidity to it. I mean, to me, it's a sort of classic hillside wine. It varies every year.
Well, I figured as much.
Yeah, I mean, it's different every year. We like Cabernet Franc a lot.
Great wine.
And I do think Cabernet Franc in Napa Valley is the third variety, just like it is in Bordeaux, like in the left bank in any case. Not so much on the right bank. I'm excluding the right bank here, but for us, it's the second wine rather than the third wine. We probably use more. We definitely use more Cabernet Franc than we do Merlot. Anything that's left over, by the way, gets sold at the end of the year. We normally speaking haven't bottled either Merlot or Cabernet Franc separately. We planted them specifically to blend into the Cabernet. And that's still our focus. This year, however, for the first time, we bottled a little bit of Cabernet Franc for the 21, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of intriguing.
We think it's great, or we wouldn't have done it. I think the wine's completely lovely. And I think Cabernet Franc does extremely well around here. One thing that bugs me about the wine business that everybody forgets is that wine is always changing, always. And sometimes you just, you've got, you bottle this beautiful organic whole, this wine that you loved, and then you bottle it and bottle shock kicks in, and all of a sudden you're going, oh, for God's sake, what happened? Did we do something wrong? No, you didn't do anything wrong. You got to be patient. And sometimes those older wines that you taste and you go, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of disappointing, It's like, I was expecting something a little bit more. Well, wait a year or two and maybe you'll get it, you know. Smith-Madrone.com.
Oddly enough.
Oddly enough.
Yeah.
I know, with no hyphen in it. It just all runs together, lowercase.
Cheers.
My pleasure.